Dragi poslušalci, lepo pozdravljeni že v 4. epizodi Pesinega soka. Danes sem z vami Timotej in ta epizoda je malce drugačna, saj je nismo snemali v studiu, temveč na terenu, natančneje v naključni učilnici na FDV-ju. Namreč nekateri člani kolektiva Rdeče Pese smo se udeležili poletne šole politične ekologije, ki je ta teden potekala na Fakulteti za družbene vede. In današnji sogovorec je eden izmed govorcev na tej poletni šoli, Emanuel Leonardi, italijanski raziskovalec in politični organizator, ki se primarno ukvarja z povezavo med okoljsko krizo in delavskim bojem. Epizoda bo izjemoma potekala v angleščini. Okay, hello, Emanuel. Thank you for agreeing to be a part of this interview. The starting point for the interview will be your presentation on this summer school of political ecology, and your presentation was titled Environmentalism of the Working Class and Climate Justice. And could you first tell a little bit about yourself, your work, and what are you currently working on?
Yeah. My name is Emanuela Leonardijem. I work for the University of Bologna. I'm a sociologist. And I mostly do work these days on the relationship between trade unions, or even more radical forms of unionism, and the ecological crisis. So, I did some study on climate justice. I studied quite a long time carbon trading and the financialization of nature, and specifically of the atmosphere. But now my focus is more on the union, a little bit because I am a sociologist of work right now in Italy. Before I was more free to choose. But I also see an important political point in focusing on unions.
Okay, thank you. And in your presentation, you mentioned that since 2019, you see like a transformation of the climate movement. So what potential do you see that they developed since 2019? And what were the positive and negative developments caused by these movements? And how did they change also after that? Because it was already almost 5 years since this break. And how would their strategy and methods need to adapt to be more successful?
Well, just to give a little overview. When we talk about climate justice, we are talking about a movement which is based on the idea that more than an atmospheric issue, global warming is an issue related to massive and global inequality, because those who are responsible for creating the problem are usually those who are least affected by the nefarious effects of global warming. And this is clearly a source of inequality, which is usually, at least in the 90s, where this idea and this movement emerged, this inequality was played out exclusively on the north-south axis. So basically the least developed countries were not responsible, but were paying the fee, and the other way around. This idea was compatible, if critical, with the system, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the idea that by marketizing climate, you could solve the crisis while keeping up the rate of profit. Not all climate justice supported that, but somehow, especially the big NGOs, provided political legitimation to that system. I think that at the very least, from the Paris Agreement 2015 onwards, just beside this idea that North-South inequality was key, also another kind of inequality began to be taken into consideration, which is the more typically linked inequality to the social question. So basically, they started to see, climate justice activists started to unpack the climate data to show that different income groups have different impacts on when it comes to emission. And so the 1% emits much, much more than the 50%, the poorest 50% of the population. And they call this shift a sort of metamorphosis of climate justice. I mean, they didn't substitute the North-South with the social question. They enlarged the scope of their critique. And along with this, they realized, I think the movements realized that the system wasn't working. So after 25 years of legislating according to the green economy idea that you could keep together profits and emissions reduction, they realized that emissions kept rising, not just in absolute terms, but even the rate of emission was skyrocketing. And so I believe that what happened at the conference of the party number 24 in Katowice 2018, when Greta Thunberg became famous, if you weren't in Sweden before, is that they stopped providing legitimation to the system. Basically what Greta said was, you have had 30 years, you failed, you are not my interlocutors any longer, I want people to take the street and to speak for themselves. Her words were somehow prophetic, because in 2019 we had the huge global climate strikes. And I think that up to that point, the COP system was still trying to recuperate or co-opt this mass movement, because it was actually a mass movement. But instead, what they found throughout 2019 was a process of progressive radicalization of CJ. In this moment, I'm focusing mostly on Italy, because I mean, I don't have a comparative research, I don't have comparative data. But in Italy, at least, you had first the merging of Fridays for Future, basically, with territorial movements which were active in Italy many years prior to 2019, and they emerged. And then when in the third global climate strikes in Italy, so September, 27th of September, you started to see some unions, rank and file and official unions, going to talk to these young people in the streets. And in my opinion, that was the sign of a new phase of these movements. So what should they do? I do believe, of course, the pandemics was a disaster for climate movements, because it stopped, basically, like the agency was undermined for a couple of years. But what we have seen in 2021 and 22 is, new the climate camps and other events are going well, and this link between radical labor movement and climate justice is becoming more and more packed in Italy, at least.
Okay, thank you. And how would you rate this radicalization in their strategy and methods? What was the main difference compared to maybe 10, 20 years ago, or even like 4 years ago?
Well, I mean, when it comes to me, the main problem, the main difference is the attitude towards the labor movement. So right now, basically, they assume that if we are serious about reducing emissions, we need to be serious also about reducing inequalities. Whereas before, they were more open to, let's say, a policy mix, which could be also incentives to the market, incentive to the enterprises. Whereas right now, it seems to me that their ideological framework is very much closer to, let's say, public intervention for social utility instead of, for example, public intervention for enterprises or to enhance the market logic. So it seems to me they have become seriously critical of the market logic in general, which positions themselves ideologically more on the left. And at least in Italy, in my opinion, it has had the effect of strengthening very much their elaboration. Like, right now, when even before the elections, Fridays for Future had some campaigns, had some points they wanted candidates to consider, and that was a solid document, which wasn't the case at the beginning. Like at the beginning, many different strands were together in that movement. I think ideological clarity is what they gained most by their proximity with the labor movement, and also with more radical social movements, which are now with them.
Okay. And in this collaboration between labor movements and environmental movements, and we have seen some very inspiring examples from Italy. Could you talk about some of them? Maybe the GKN is the most inspiring one.
In fact, more than some examples, it's one, unfortunately. We hope.
We're working on it.
Exactly. We'll do our best, of course, to multiply this. But then again, this case provided the conditions for the turning point I tried to describe, because what happened basically, the GKN driveline, the factory in Campi Bisenzio near Florence, was one of the many factories in Europe and in the world. It was an automotive sector player, owned recently, up until 2021, in Campi Bisenzio, but right now the owner is still Melrose Industries, which is an hedge fund based in the UK. What happened near Florence was that on July 9th, 2021, all workers, around 500, received an email saying, well, on Monday don't come back to work because the factory is shut down. Due to previous unionization, they come from a radical tradition, they were able to respond very quickly. So basically they went to the factory, entered the factory, and established a permanent assembly, which is still running today, more than 2 years after that July. And at the beginning, what we saw was a typical, if you want to have a successful union response to delocalization or shutting down factories, you have what GKN factory workers, they have a collective, GKN collective, did. So occupy the factory and ask for and demand your jobs to be back. What they realized a few months after this is that in order for their dispute to be successful, they could not go alone, just by themselves. They had to converge with other movements. And what is original, and in my opinion, the most important aspect of this, they recognized in climate justice the main political line in society that could enforce, strengthen, empower their struggle. They are very aware that global warming is just one of the many, the ecological crisis is much larger than global warming. But climate justice has been the only movement which was able to become a mass movement in 2019. And this mass character was exactly, from a political point of view, what GKN workers and the collective was looking for. And so basically they started to first think of their own demands in climatic terms, and then to establish ties with this movement. It took a little bit of time, of course, but the second phase of the dispute, starting from the spring of 2022, was when this movement started to converge. And throughout 2022, we had 4 huge demonstrations of this convergence: Florence, Bologna, Naples, and then, the fourth was in 2023, again in Florence. And during this period, the collective, with a group of Solidary researchers, developed a reindustrialization plan, which actually called for state intervention in the interest of public utility, basically social utility. And so the idea was, we would like to keep producing axle shafts for the automotive sector, but not for private cars, for electric buses. So the main idea was, the state should establish a value chain such that we have Italian factories producing electric buses, Italian factories producing components, but with a critique of private car. So electrification is okay if public mobility is at the center of this transformation, because I mean, if everybody of us is going to drive an electric car, we know very well that that's not ecological, because maybe it's ecological here, but it requires extraction of critical minerals. We know in which condition and where. And since the collective has accepted, incorporated the decolonial aspect of climate justice, this is not something that is possible for them. It's different. So this was the first plan in 2022. Since state intervention didn't happen, neither with the Draghi government, the technocrats, nor with the explicitly right-wing government right now after the election last year, they were confronted with these two options. Like, either they settle for social compensation and they stop their struggle, or they develop a less ambitious plan for reindustrialization and find their own capital. So they launched a crowdfunding with a project with two lines. One is producing cargo bikes, and they will have at the end of September the first big meeting with a lot of small players in Italy who are doing work on bicycles to find a network they will produce, but then of course they need commercial venues to sell and keep the engine running, and that should employ 20-25 workers if I remember correctly, but everything is available online if listeners are interested to know more about that. And the other,
maybe I can ask you for the link later and we can put it in the description.
Absolutely.
Sorry for both. Yeah.
Oh, no problem. And the second line is more ambitious because it's about solar panels of a new generation, where new generation means not requiring critical minerals, but salt should be the main raw material. But I don't know more about that because there's an industrial secret. So, it's a German startup who wanted to work with the GKN collective to see, and that should employ around 150 or 200 workers. The crowdfunding was extremely successful. On July 10th, the cooperative, because they are basically updating the tradition of workers-led mutual aid, the Italian one. It worked very well at the end of 19th, beginning of 20th century. It's not working that well now, but whatever. They are trying to do things along those lines. And this is the second reindustrialization plan. And so far, we don't know what happens tomorrow. But tomorrow they will be in France talking about their dispute, because they have started to go to Germany, UK, and now France.
Talk about their struggle.
Exactly, it can be an example. Of course, we don't have recipes which are valid everywhere, but the idea that the only way their struggle could be successful was through an organic alliance with climate justice is new to my understanding and is extremely important for us.
Yeah, that's super interesting. But what were the reactions of the previous government, let's say, or the local powers?
Yeah,
that's and the current government. Is there a difference? How do they, in a way?
Okay, let's start with that. Locally, they have received support because we are talking 500 households, and we are talking since they come from a radical union. Their union is CGL, so it's not particularly radical. Not all of them are, but mostly, most of them. But they established the factory collective before this dispute began. Okay, so they were connecting to more radical traditions than the ones that. No. Well, theoretically speaking, I don't even know. If they have particular positions. I'm just saying that they, you could tell that there was experience in dealing with union issues and not just in a procedural way. it's very political unionism, what you find in that experience, regardless of the theoretical strengths, which maybe one or two of them, but as I said, I don't know their political education and things like that. So they were very connected with the territory in which the factory insists, and they received support by other workers, by other unions, and even by local government. When it comes to the regional level, it was a little bit more complicated because, of course, they said, of course, we should support and stuff like that. But in the end, one may say, I mean, then again, it depends. But in some interpretations, one may say that they wanted them to settle for compensation instead of keep struggling. And instead, when it came to the national government, when the new owner, the Italian one, and then it didn't work out, was trying, actually both. The factory, of course, the government was very supportive of this entrepreneur, but then, of course, he never showed any plan for reindustrialization. What is interesting, though, so basically the government never supported this, but when they showed the first plan to the the experts of the ministry, these experts were extremely surprised by the quality of the plan, and and so that was the first moment in which they realized that this mixture of workers' knowledge and experts giving their time and competences to them was working out. Okay, because I mean that's the right-wing government that I know of is being absent. But not just with GKN, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. And we touched on a little bit on the possibilities of these types of organizations spreading earlier. And as we mentioned, yes, not all strategies, not all methods work same in all contexts. But do you see some possibility of something like this spreading maybe throughout Italy, maybe, or just more regionally, or through Europe?
Okay, let's say this very quickly. What has been extremely interesting at the regional level is that they managed to establish an important connection with another occupation, which is a field occupation. It's called Mondeggi Bene Comune, and they are part of a larger network called Genuino Clandestino, but it's a huge field, hectares and hectares and hectares occupied, I think more than 10 years now. And they managed to converge, which wasn't easy at the beginning, but they both were very good, I think. And they succeeded in this. So, in general, a convergence is happening. It's by far not nearly enough. Okay, we would need something much bigger. But slowly, step by step, this tendency is taking place. I would say this to come to your question. Objectively speaking, the crisis of what we can call ecological transition from above, that idea, profit plus environmental protection, this crisis is objective and everywhere. Okay, so all disputes to come in this sector, of course, related to ecology, will face this. There's no potential of capitalist development with the ecological crisis. Then, of course, this is not enough because, unless you subjectively force the field, the framework of compatibilities, or you just lose, and losing is always the more likely scenario when we are weak as we are at the moment. So what can we do? I would say, at least this is how I perceive my position as an academic, who is also a militant, is to, reflect and try to spread a little bit some example. Even these moments of me telling you about this story is one of the things a person in my position can do to create proper conditions so that when the bubble bursts, because the bubble is going to burst, subjectively we are in the position to respond. Okay, at the moment this is far from being we cannot take that for granted, and that's why I think working to create the conditions is important. It may be too late, yes, it may be too late, but the option is either you don't do anything, or at least as I see it, or you try to create these conditions, and of course being super aware of the limitations, individuals don't count. It's always a collective endeavor, and of course it's not us at the moment who will determine a turning point, but if the turning point happens, we will need to be ready to serve.
So basically, until then, we need to educate ourselves, agitate among people, and organize to be ready.
That's in my opinion. Then of course we can discuss about it.
Yeah, about methods. I think that the question of methods and strategies are one of the most important ones we need to have in these times, in these days.
Agreed.
Okay, and another thing that you mentioned in your presentation is that the perception of ecology changed after these struggles in Italy. And how is this reflected? How in public debates or public opinion, and how will this change perception of ecology affect further organizing?
Yeah, well, I would say that when it comes to social movements, our world, okay, so not single that or that organization, but in general our world, this was a welcome development, because it wasn't evident to many that a popular ecology or an ecology for the people or working class environmentalism were options today, were practically doable. And this dispute, the GKN, ex-GKN case showed that it is possible. It's not just desirable, because everyone on the left would like to have this merging of labor and ecology, but showing that it is possible was very important. That said, in the public opinion with the right-wing government, what we are seeing is the rise of a new kind of denialism, okay? Because basically, back in the 90s, where climate justice were confronting the first phase denialism, with the exception of a few crazy people talking about global cooling, the idea was, yes, temperatures are rising, but it's not because of anthropogenic activities, anthropic activities. So, it's not anthropogenic. So we cannot do anything. We can only adapt. We cannot mitigate. Whereas right now in Italy, and we are talking the government, they are basically saying it has always been hot. Okay, droughts have happened, flooding have happened before. Come on, what we need is to be ready to that, because temperatures are not rising, but extreme weather events are more frequent. So we need to make them more frequent. Yes, we cannot do anything about that, but less damaging. And so this is becoming an excuse to push for more mega infrastructures. Okay? And that's clearly, what is positive in my opinion is that the political field of ecology is becoming much clearer than it was before. As if the yellow vests lesson has been learned. And so right now we know that the main question is who pays for the transition. If it's the rich, then the transition is interesting. Let's talk about that. If it's the poor, it's not transition. Okay, that's and this is becoming increasingly clear. But in this properly politicized field, the right wing is still much stronger than us. So, somehow we are closer to truth.
But we're still weak.
Yeah, no. Truth is good if you have social force.
To actually use it.
To use it. If not, it's just okay.
Okay, we know the truth, but what now? Yeah, my friend, actually, she has a saying that I really like, that truth alone will not help us win. And
At
I
all.
really like that. I really like that.
In GKN, they say, if you are right and you lose, that's it's because in Italian, the word for reason is, well, I mean, if you know the truth and you lose, that thing makes you a donkey. It means you're stupid.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, being on the right, on the truthful side, has importance only if it helps you win. If not, it's just it's even more stupid. You were right and you lost.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, and the last question, which may be a bit broader one, and what are the strategies of transnational capitalist institutions like EU, IMF, and so on to tackle the climate crisis? And what would be the consequences of these approaches to the climate movement and to the workers, and what should be our response and our strategies to counter that? Touched upon that as well before.
Yeah, exactly.
To develop it, because it's an important point, and I see that we can see a kind of resistance to the top-down ecological. Yellow vests are also an example.
Yeah. I would distinguish two levels.
Okay.
One is the transnational one. So the Framework Convention, the UN, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, so the Conference of the Parties. And the other one is regional responses to the new scenario, because in my opinion, the mix of pandemic plus war, basically it's truly the end, even from the point of view of the elite, of something like a real, veritable ecological transition from above. You see that with the debate about coal in Germany and stuff like that, but not just in Germany, everywhere. So in this scenario, which the COP system reacted by and after Glasgow, it seems Glasgow COP26 in 2021, you can see that very clearly. We said that the wager was profit up and emissions down, and that emissions down was key. Okay, so because as a political register of climate change, historically, the first to emerge was adaptation in the 70s during the Cold War. And the idea basically was there were joint teams, with Soviet and American scientists saying, hey, there's a problem with climate change. And of course, their respective governments would say, hey, come on, there's the Cold War. So the priority is to win this, then we'll see. So we believe you, there's a problem with climate change. You come up with solutions to adapt, because there's no way we stop producing as we are producing, and we are winning or losing this Cold War within production. There's no question about it. The register of mitigation actually emerged with transnational climate governance, okay? And that's the difference with the previous phase. Previous phase was just we cannot stop producing, so we adapt to climate change. Here they said, no, you can actually stop climate change by making money out of it, okay? And what you're seeing, in my opinion, in Glasgow, but of course in Egypt last year, and what we'll see most probably, in my opinion, most likely in the next COP in the United Arab Emirates, is a new centrality of adaptation. Right now, the only way they talk about emissions reduction is in terms of net zero, which is not reduction, which is a compensated reduction. So they assume they cannot reduce emissions. And that actually, in my opinion, makes it debatable that we are, formally, it's still the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. But politically speaking, it's not, it's really an agency for adaptation. So I expect a lot of talk about geoengineering, a return of techno-fixes, okay, carbon capture and storage and stuff like that, which were discussed at previous COPs, but not as the centerpiece of that. And in this scenario, in my opinion, the point is, for us, as I said before, if that wager doesn't work, okay, either you win or you lose. And we'll see if unions, it depends on countries, it depends on many other variables. But, in the end, one thing is to say I accept the green economy because I am weak and there is, something I can get, although it's not ideal. And another one is there's nothing for me and I accept it. I mean, I think I don't take for granted that they won't be radicalized along these lines. So this is for the transnational climate governance. When it comes to regional responses, of course, right now the big tension is between the US and China. So in that case, it's going to be entirely technological. The European Union is in a very tough position at the moment. So the Green Deal, the European Union Green Deal, which before the Next Generation EU was quite simply green austerity, no more than that. Of course, the Next Generation EU, which basically shifts, the main instrument of that is public investment. So that was a big turning point with regard to market incentives in the Green Deal. But after the war, it's public investments in the interest of some sectors of national industries, most prominently weapons. So, I mean, what I can tell is that the strategy of, for example, lithium in Portugal, or even in Serbia, they are talking about that, and we'll see. The idea, I suppose, is to reshore as much as possible a few sectors which are supposed to be key and central, electric components, microcomponents, and those sectors let's say the breakthrough areas. It's unlikely that it is successful to the point of making the European Union a significant player in comparison with China and the United States. Obviously, in comparison to other less powerful actors, the European Union will have something to say. But I don't see it having a lot of hopes for peaceful development, a social model, a veritable social model or something like that.
And what are the responses that we can see among the working class to this eco-modernization from the top, in a way?
Well, I mean, I may be wrong. Right now we are talking from my opinion as a militant. I would say that worst case scenario is the right-wing new shape, new form of denialism tapping into a disenfranchised working class. That's a possible scenario, but that would be the worst. And the other one, I started recently a research project, a militant research project on the transformation of class identities. As I hope that what I see is not just me projecting what I would like to see, but a true dynamic. You never know. Après coup, after that happened, if you were right or not. But whatever. My impression is that, we know we need workers' pride in order to mobilize, gain social force, and impose our views on the economic system and democratic process and stuff like that. Traditionally, class identities have been linked to heavy work and to this, let's call it Promethean or productivist way of interacting with nature in such a way that transforming nature to meet social needs would be where workers took pride in their job. Right now, for sure, social reproduction is gaining prominence when it comes both to capitalist valorization, but also to thinking the alternative to that. And if workers can find ways to take pride in their job, not manipulating or destroying nature, but rather restoring it, and which is partly what is happening in the GKN. They basically say, we workers are the only one who can solve the problem. Okay, because you cannot take that into account. Your profit imperative prevents you from being successful in this endeavor, whereas our claim, we are based on use values and social utility, so we can do that, and we, we'll save the world because we are workers. Okay, at the moment it's not widespread; it's one vanguard, doing that. But if we can do that, and especially when it comes to jobs like people working in the waste sector, in hospitals, which are important parts of contemporary economy in Europe, then maybe even industrial workers or people working in brown sectors, they call it, can actually, if the dynamic sees the centrality of workers in social reproduction, then even workers in production will follow the lead. Because, historically speaking, the way someone not working in industries were taking pride in his or her job on the model of factory workers was political. There was nothing natural in that. And if we find a way to go that way, but the other way around, then there may be possibilities to mobilize workers in regenerative or restorative terms, saying capital is destroying the planet. I can keep it habitable. We can keep it habitable. And of course, it takes a little bit of optimism to think that, but let's try.
And what should we as political organizers do to help bring this about?
As we were saying before, at the very least, for many years, when I was active in climate or environmental or ecologist movements, I would say we need to talk to workers. Even if it seems impossible, even if right now they are in favor of that mega project or something like that, unions and workers, you always have to frame your argument in such a way that A, they are not responsible because actually they are not responsible, and B, they can find something for them in what you say. As difficult as it seems, that should be your goal every single moment when you think. Right now we are, I think, in a better position because we can think about that materialistically. It's not voluntaristic, but there is some, since they failed, we actually are the only possibility. And this is why, sometimes when I talk about that in Italy, they say, well, it's too radical. But I'm sure, reason in this moment, in this conversation, is only with GKN. There is no other option which is as reasonable as that. Then you can tell me that you prefer to live in a planet that dies to preserve the profit motive. I am respectful of that. If it's your opinion, but there's no way you can say that maintaining the profit motive is not destroying the planet. They actually come here with a very reasonable plan too, actually, which keeps the economy running, not with that profit margin, of course, but at least, it tackles the problem. And it's incredible how the only way people are reacting to what is happening in GKN is either ignoring, which is the main media and stuff like that, or trying to make it a caricature. Oh, the Bolsheviks, or the new communists or something like that. Nobody has interacted with the plan, because if you go there, you do like the experts in the technical people at the ministry. You say, wow, it's solid, it can work, easy. So we should support this dynamic, knowing that, at least this is my opinion, if 10 years ago they would have told me, in 10 years you will have some cases like this, and an objective debate, a truly happening debate within unions at all levels, rank and file and official, which needs to, they recognize the need to account for that issue in a way, for example, the climate jobs campaign, Portugal and South Africa and the UK. And I mean, there are different ways of doing that, but this is a development which to me was unexpected. And so maybe it's too late. I acknowledge that, but I'm happy we are having this conversation not in the abstract, but in the concrete.
Okay, great. Thank you. That concludes my questions. So if there is something you would like to tell to our audience, or otherwise tell where we can follow your work, or what would you recommend to people who are interested in the topics that you talked about, what they can read to learn more about these things?
Oh, wow, that's surprising. I will send you a couple of links.
Okay,
of course, not my work. They have already been so patient to listen to me this long time. I think about something there are blogs and stuff I think are good. And I'll send you the links, but I need to think about that.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. It was a lovely conversation, and I hope to talk to you again sometime in the future.
The same for me. Thank you.